3 days before Thanksgiving, my son called and said 6 words I never expected to hear from him. Dad, we need to talk first. I was in my garage in Boise, Idaho, reorganizing the shelves the way I always do when I have nothing better to do with my hands. 64 years old, retired electrician, hands that still knew how to stay busy even when the rest of me didn't know what to do with itself. I set down the box of old tools and pressed the phone harder against my ear. What is it, son? He cleared his throat, the way he does when he's about to say something he rehearsed. Natalie and I have been talking about Thanksgiving, about the sleeping situation and the kids' schedules and everything. There's just a lot going on this year. I waited. We think it might be easier if you didn't come up this year. Easier. I turned that word over in my mind like a stone. Easier for who? I wanted to ask. But I already knew. My daughter-in-law had never liked me. Not since I made the mistake of telling my son 2 Christmases ago that I thought they were spending beyond their means. I said it quietly, just the two of us, the way I thought a father should. He had nodded and said he'd think about it. Natalie found out somehow. After that, every visit had an invisible clock on it. Every conversation had a ceiling. Is this about what I said to you at Christmas? I asked. He paused too long. Dad, it's just a lot of moving parts. Moving parts? My son was 41 years old and he was talking to me in corporate language. Okay, I said. I understand. I didn't understand at all. But I said it because I didn't know what else to say, and because something in his voice told me that arguing would only make him feel worse without changing anything. He had already made up his mind. Or she had already made it up for him. I hung up and stood in my garage for a long time without moving. I had 2 grandchildren I hadn't seen since July. My grandson was 7 and obsessed with trains. My granddaughter was 4 and had just started calling me Pop Pop instead of Grandpa, like she'd invented the name herself and was proud of it. I had bought a model train set 2 months earlier and driven it to their house on a Tuesday, just to see the look on the boy's face. Natalie had smiled tightly and said what a thoughtful gift. My son had put his hand on my shoulder and said thanks, Dad, in the voice he uses when he's standing between two things he doesn't know how to hold at once. That was the last time I'd been invited, so I spent Thanksgiving alone for the first time in 64 years. I drove to a diner on the edge of town called Maples, the kind of place with vinyl booths and laminated menus and a turkey special that comes with stuffing and a dinner roll the size of your fist. I got there early, before the lunch crowd. The waitress was maybe 30, tired in the way people get when they've been on their feet since 5 in the morning, and she gave me a corner booth without my asking, the one facing away from the families. I ordered the turkey special and a cup of coffee and sat there feeling like a piece of furniture that had been moved to a storage room. About halfway through my meal, an older man at the counter turned around and looked at me. He was maybe 70, thick white beard, wearing a flannel shirt and work boots like he'd come straight from something outdoor. He had one of those faces that looks like it's been through weather. He nodded at me. You look like a man eating alone on Thanksgiving. I am, I said. He slid off his stool, picked up his coffee mug and walked over. Mind if I join you? Every reasonable part of me wanted to say yes, I mind. Leave me alone. But I looked at the empty seat across from me and thought about what I was protecting by keeping it empty. I said, go ahead. His name was Walt. He was a retired forest ranger from outside McCall, widower, 3 adult children all living out of state. He drove down to Boise twice a month to visit his sister and stopped at Mabel's every time because, he said, the coffee was the only coffee in Idaho worth diving for. His wife had died 6 years ago and he still set 2 coffee mugs out every morning by habit. We talked for 2 hours. About his wife, about my son, about the particular loneliness of being old enough to know better but still young enough to feel it. He didn't try to fix anything. He just listened, and then he talked, and somewhere in that exchange I felt the tightness in my chest ease just slightly, the way a knot loosens when you stop pulling against it. When I got up to leave, he pulled a card from his shirt pocket. It was plain white with his name and number written by hand. I drive back to Boise on the 15th, he said. There's a diner over on State Street I like. Join me if you want. No pressure. I put the card in my wallet and drove home through the grey November afternoon thinking it was just a polite gesture, the kind people make and don't follow up on. I almost didn't call, I called. That second lunch led to a third. The third led to Walt inviting me to join his weekly poker game at a community room at his sister's church. which wasn't really poker so much as four old men sitting around a folding table pretending to play poker while actually talking about their gardens and their knees and their kids and everything they thought about, but didn't have anyone to say it to anymore. The other two men were named Frank and Denny. Frank was a retired high school football coach from Nampa, divorced twice, with a laugh that came out of him like a door blowing open in the wind. Denny was quiet and careful, and had worked for the state forestry department for 30 years, and had more knowledge about trees than any person I had ever met. Within 2 months, those three men had become the fixed point of my week. Every Thursday at 1 o'clock, Frank always brought chips. Denny always brought something his wife made because his wife Beverly couldn't seem to send her husband anywhere without feeding someone. Walt always brought the coffee. I brought whatever I could think of, which was usually brownies from the box mix because I had never been much of a cook. And I was 64 years old and not about to pretend otherwise. I did not hear from my son that Thanksgiving. I got a text 3 days later. Hope you're a good holiday, Dad. Call soon. He never called. Christmas came. I sent gifts for the grandchildren through the mail. I included a card for my son and a separate one for my daughter-in-law because I still believed in trying, even when trying felt like shouting into a well. My son texted me on Christmas morning. Thanks, Dad. They love the gifts. 2 hours later, my daughter-in-law posted a photo on a social media of the living room. All the gifts opened and spread across the floor, the kids in their pajamas. My grandson was holding a toy that was not the train car I'd sent. I don't know why I looked. I didn't call. I thought about calling, the way you think about touching a bruise. Instead, I went to Frank's house because Frank had told all three of us that his daughter was in Phoenix and he was grilling steaks whether anyone came or not, and that we were welcome if we wanted to be useful and bring dessert. I brought brownies from the box. Frank made steaks. Denny and Beverly showed up with a green bean casserole and a bottle of wine. Walt brought coffee in a thermos. We sat around Frank's kitchen table for 4 hours, telling stories I'd already heard twice and laughing anyway. And when I drove home that night, the loneliness was still there. It never fully went away, but it was the size of a stone I could carry, instead of a weight that carried me. 8 months passed, then 14. Then my son called on a Tuesday morning in February, and something in his voice was different before he even said anything. Tight, compressed, like he was holding something in, and the effort showed. Dad, hey, I need to talk to you about something. Okay, he exhaled slowly. The business isn't doing great. You know we've been trying to expand the second location, and the loan we took out has a balloon payment coming up. And we're a little short. I set down my coffee cup. How short? I asked. He said a number. It was large. It was the kind of number that lives in a retirement account if you've been careful for 40 years, which I had been. I want you to know this isn't easy to ask, he said, and I know things have been weird between us. But we're looking at losing the business if we can't cover this by the end of March, and I didn't know who else to call. I sat with that for a moment, didn't know who else to call. Not I wanted to call you, not I miss you, Dad, not any acknowledgement of the year and a half that had passed with barely a word between us. Just a number that needed covering and a phone that needed dialing. When did we last actually talk? I asked. Not text. Talk. Silence. I'm trying to remember, I said. Was it Thanksgiving when you told me not to come? I think I got a text after that, and maybe a call in March when you needed advice about the contractor. Was that it? Dad, this isn't the time to. You called me, son. You told me not to come to your home for the holidays. You've let a year and a half go by without a real conversation. And now you need a large sum of money by the end of March, and suddenly here we are. I know. His voice was quiet. I know how it sounds. Does your wife know you're calling me? Another silence. That answer itself told me everything. I'm not going to give you the money, I said. Dad, not because I don't love you. I do. I have loved you since the moment they put you in my arms, and I will love you until I'm in the ground and probably some way after that. But giving you that money won't fix what's broken. It'll just put a board over it so neither of us has to look at it for another year. And then there'll be something else. Another balloon payment. Another emergency. And I'll become the account you draw from when everything else runs dry. You're saying no. I'm saying I can't keep making myself small enough to fit into whatever space you and your wife decide to leave for me. And I can't keep funding my own invisibility. I'm a person, not a resource. He didn't say anything for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had hardened in a way I recognized. It was his mother's voice from the end of our marriage. The voice that came out when someone had stopped trying to understand and started trying to win. I didn't think you'd be like this, he said. I told Natalie you'd want to help. I defended you. You defended me to your wife? I always defend you to her. And this is what I get. The line went quiet. Then he said, I think we need some space, Dad. I think it's better if we both just. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I put the phone down on the kitchen table and looked at it for a minute. Then I went and called Walt and told him I needed to talk. He said, Come over. I'm making chili. I drove to his sister's house and sat at her kitchen table for 3 hours, eating the best chili I'd had in years, while Walt listened to the whole thing without once telling me what I should have done differently. That's hard, he said when I finished. Just that. 2 words. But he said it the way someone says it when they mean it, and that was enough. I thought he'd call back within a week, I said. Maybe he will, Walt said. And maybe you won't be waiting by the phone when he does. And maybe that's okay. I did not wait by the phone. I went to poker on Thursday. I brought brownies. Frank won 4 hands and crowed about it for 45 minutes. Denny's wife Beverly sent homemade chocolate chip cookies with a note that said she'd heard I was having a hard week and hoped these helped. I don't know what Denny told her. I didn't ask. I just ate 3 cookies and felt, for a moment, like someone's son again. 5 years went by. I know that sounds impossible. It didn't feel like 5 years. It felt like the same week playing out over and over. And then one morning I woke up and my grandson was 12 and I'd missed most of it. I retired fully and started volunteering twice a week at an after-school program at the elementary school near my house, helping kids with math and reading. I got better at cooking because Frank and I started cooking together on Sunday afternoons, and Frank turned out to be genuinely good at it, and I couldn't let him be better at everything. Walt taught me to fly fish, which I was terrible at, and which I loved anyway. Beverly and Denny had their 40th anniversary and invited me to the dinner, and I sat at the family table between their daughter and their son-in-law and felt inexplicably and surprisingly at home. I sent birthday cards to my grandchildren every year. I sent them for my son and daughter-in-law too. I never got responses. I sent them anyway because I decided that the kind of father I was going to be was not determined by whether anyone was watching. Then, on a Thursday morning in September, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The area code was Portland. My son had moved to Portland 2 years ago, I'd heard through a cousin. Mr. Whitfield? The voice was a woman's, professional, measured. This is the charge nurse at Providence St. Vincent Medical Center. We have your son listed as a patient, and you're listed as his emergency contact. He's been admitted. I think you should come. I was in my truck and on the road within 20 minutes. I called Walt from the highway. He said he'd meet me there. I told him it was a 6-hour drive. He said he'd see me there. My son had collapsed at work. A cardiac event, they called it. Not a full heart attack, but something that could have been if it had gone differently. He was stable. He was going to be fine, but he had been alone when it happened, and the paramedics had found my name in his phone listed as emergency contact, which meant that somewhere in 5 years of silence, he hadn't removed me from that list. My daughter-in-law was there when I arrived. We hadn't been in the same room since the Thanksgiving he told me not to come. She looked at me the way someone looks when they've prepared for a confrontation and then suddenly don't have the energy for it. I looked at her the same way. How is he? I asked. Stable, she said. He's been asking for you. I didn't know what to do with that, so I just nodded and went into the room. He looked smaller in the hospital bed. I don't know why that surprised me. He was still my son, same dark hair going grey at the temples now. Same hands, my hands, lying on the white sheet. He turned his head when I came in, and I saw something cross his face that I hadn't seen in 5 years. Relief. Dad. Hey, son. I pulled the chair to the side of the bed and sat down. I'm here. I didn't know if you'd come. I said I'm here. We sat like that for a while, not saying much. The monitors beeped. A nurse came in and checked something and went back out. Outside the window, the Portland sky was the color of a dirty dishcloth, which is mostly what it looks like in September. I thought about you, he said finally. When it was happening, when I didn't know what was going on and I couldn't breathe right, and I thought, he stopped. I was thinking about when I was a kid. When I broke my arm falling out of that tree in the backyard and you drove me to the ER and sat with me the whole time and kept making terrible jokes. I remembered, I said. You told me my jokes weren't funny. They weren't. He almost smiled. But they helped. The silence came back softer this time. He looked at the ceiling. I've been a bad son. I didn't disagree. But I didn't say anything. I let Natalie decide too much, he said. About you. About us. I kept telling myself it was keeping the peace. I didn't. He stopped again. I was afraid of her, of disappointing her. And it was easier to let you be the one who got pushed out, because you always just took it. I did, I said. For a long time I did. And then you stopped, and then I stopped. He turned his head to look at me. The money thing. The call. I know why you said no. I understood it even then. I was just so angry at you for saying it because it meant I had to look at myself and I didn't want to look at myself. I know, son. Are you okay? He asked it like it was a strange question, and I suppose for us, right then it was. Are you doing okay? Since all of it. I told him about Walt, about Frank and Denny in Beverly, about the poker game and the Sunday cooking, and the fly fishing, and the after school program, and the brownies from the box mix. He listened, and I watched his face do something it hadn't done in years. Relax, like a man who has been carrying a weight so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to set it down. You found people, he said. I found people. I want to meet them, he said. Someday, when all this is, I want to meet the people who were there for you when I wasn't. He stayed in the hospital for 4 days. I stayed in Portland for all four. Walt drove up on the second day, showed up at the hospital with a thermos of coffee and a thermos of chili, and sat in the waiting room with my daughter-in-law for 2 hours, talking about Idaho and forestry and whatever else people talk about when they're waiting together. I don't know what he said to her. But when I came out of my son's room, she looked at me differently than she had before. On the third day, she found me in the hallway. I owe you an apology, she said. Not for everything. I'm not ready for everything. But for the last 5 years, I looked at her. She was 40 years old, and she looked tired in the way someone looks when they've been performing a version of themselves for a long time and gotten exhausted by it. I accept it, I said. And I mean that. She nodded. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. He talks about you, she said, when he thinks I'm not listening. He tells the kids stories about you. The time you took him camping and it rained for 3 straight days. The car you two rebuilt in the garage when he was 15. He's never stopped being your son. He just didn't know how to be both things at once. I didn't know what to say, so I just said, thank you for telling me. My son came home from the hospital on a Saturday. I drove back to Boise and got a call from him 2 days later. A real call, not a text. We talked for an hour and 40 minutes about nothing important. About his kids, about my volunteers, about the model train set that his son had apparently never stopped playing with. He said his daughter still called me Pop Pop to anyone who would listen, even kids at preschool she didn't know. That made me laugh harder than I'd laughed in a long time. 6 months later, my son and daughter-in-law started couples counseling. They told me, which surprised me, the telling. They weren't asking for anything, they were just telling me the truth about their lives the way families are supposed to. My daughter-in-law started calling me once a month, brief calls, careful, the way you move on ice when you're not sure how thick it is. But she called. Natalie and I are never going to be easy. I don't think we're supposed to be. But we're something now that we weren't before, which is honest. My grandchildren came to visit me in Boise last summer. A whole week, just me and them, the first time since they were small. My grandson and I built the model train layout across half the living room floor and ran it for 3 solid days. My granddaughter insisted on sleeping with the nightlight on and woke me up at 6:30 every morning to ask if it was time for breakfast, and I told her yes every single time even when it wasn't. Because getting up at 6:30 to make pancakes for a 5-year who called you Pop Pop is not something you say no to. On the last night of their visit, after the kids were asleep, my son and I sat on my back porch with 2 beers and listened to the night. The Boise summer dark, dry and warm, with the smell of sagebrush coming in from somewhere. I'm sorry, Dad, he said. For real this time. Not because I needed something, not because I was in a hospital bed. Just because it's true and you deserve to hear it. I know, son. Do you forgive me? I looked at him. My boy, my 41-year-old boy with grey at his temples and lines around his eyes and hands that looked more like mine every year. I forgave you a long time ago, I said. Forgiving you was never the hard part. The hard part was forgiving myself for letting it go on so long. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the guys you told me about, Walt and Frank and Denny, would it be weird if I wanted to meet them? I smiled. I'll set up the poker game. This past Thanksgiving, we all sat around a table at Frank's house. My son and daughter-in-law and the grandchildren drove up from Portland. Walt was there, and Denny and Beverly, and Frank, who had somehow made 3 different kinds of pie and was extremely pleased with himself about it. My granddaughter climbed onto Walt's lap within 20 minutes and told him at length about her best friend at school and her feelings about mushrooms, which were, she made clear, extremely negative. My grandson and Denny talked about trees for 45 minutes, which I would not have predicted, but which made complete sense the moment I watched it happen. At one point, I looked across the table and saw my daughter-in-law laughing at something Frank said. A real laugh. The surprised kind, and my son watching me watch her. And when our eyes met, he raised his glass just slightly and I raised mine back. My son found me in the kitchen later, while everyone else was still at the table. This is what it was supposed to look like, he said. I put my arm around his shoulder. Yeah, I said, something like that. If you're listening to this and there's someone in your life who's been pushed to the edges, a father or a mother or a grandparent, someone who shows up and gets nothing back, I want to say something plainly. The people who keep showing up quietly, who send the birthday cards and make the drives and sit in the hospital waiting rooms without being asked, those people are doing something harder than anything you'll ever be asked to do. They're choosing love when love keeps costing them. And if you're the one who's been doing the pushing, if you've let someone important get crowded out of your life by the business of it, by a spouse's discomfort or your own fear or just the ordinary laziness of taking good things for granted, it is not too late. It is almost never too late. Walt saw a stranger eating alone on Thanksgiving and walked over. That's all he did. He just walked over. I try to remember that. On the days when it feels too complicated or too far gone or too much work, I try to remember that everything that changed started with one person deciding that someone else was worth the walk across the room. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the quietest kind of strength is the kind that keeps showing up, even when no one is watching. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened. Not the events, I know those by heart, but the why underneath them. The way things unfolded the way they did, in that particular order, for those particular reasons. I used to think I was unlucky. 64 years old, a retired electrician who did everything right by the people he loved, and still ended up alone at a diner on Thanksgiving. That felt like bad luck for a long time. It doesn't anymore. Because here's what I've come to understand, sitting on the other side of it. What happened to me wasn't random. It was the result of a chain of choices. Mine and my son's and my daughter-in-law's, stretching back years before that phone call. I had taught my son without meaning to that I would absorb whatever he gave me, that I would shrink when asked to shrink. That love from me had no floor, no edge, no point at which I would simply say, this is not acceptable. I taught him that by doing it quietly and consistently for years, and he learned the lesson perfectly. The moment I finally stopped, the moment I told him I wouldn't hand over my retirement savings to paper over a problem I hadn't caused and wasn't being asked to prevent, just fund, everything shifted. Not immediately. It got worse before it got better. But that refusal was the first honest thing I had said to my son in years. And honesty, even when it costs you something, has a way of setting a direction that dishonesty never can. That's the thing about integrity. It doesn't feel like strength in the moment. It feels like loss. When I hung up that phone and sat in my quiet kitchen knowing I might not hear from my son again for a very long time, I did not feel strong. I felt like a man who had just made a terrible mistake. But I also felt underneath that something I hadn't felt in years. Like myself. Like a person with a shape to him. Edges that meant something. Walt walked across a diner on Thanksgiving because he saw a man eating alone and decided that was something worth doing something about. That's it. That's the whole origin of everything that came after. One person deciding that a stranger's dignity was worth a short walk. What I got from that, the years with him and Frank and Denny and Beverly, the poker games and the fly fishing and the Sunday cooking and the sense of belonging I had quietly stopped believing I deserved, all of it traces back to that one small act of human decency. And what my son got from it was harder, and it took longer. He had to collapse in a conference room in Portland for it to happen. He had to lie in a hospital bed and go back in his mind to the things that actually mattered. The camping trips and the terrible jokes and the hands that held him when he was scared. He had to face the fact that he had traded all of that for the comfort of not having a difficult conversation with his wife. The regret in his face when I walked into that hospital room is something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Not because I want to hold it over him, because it told me something true about him, that he had never stopped knowing what he'd given up. He just hadn't been brave enough to go get it back. Until he had to be. That's what I think about now when things get hard. Not what I deserve or don't deserve, just whether I'm being brave enough to be honest. With myself first, and then with the people I love. It's a small thing, and it's everything.